The New York Times, a.k.a. the New York Slimes, a.k.a. the newspaper, founded and run by Jews, which helped cover up the Holocaust because they didn't want to offend. Now, they have an editorial today. I don't have time to unravel every damn piece of it, but it is a radical left editorial board. But it's very, very important, I think, that we break down this one issue on immigration. Because I want Donald Trump and his team to understand they are 100% right about this issue of ideology and assimilation. And it struck a nerve with the left. They're calling it McCarthyism. They call everything they disagree with McCarthyism. As you imagine they would, because they're as close to Marxists as is imaginable these days. Mark, are you calling them Reds? Yes, I am. They write, with terrorism as his central focus, this is their editorial today, Mr. Trump's foreign policy confusions, Mr. Trump doubled down on the anti-refugee themes that have dominated his campaign, dressing them up as a national security issue. He proposed a new extreme vetting, quote-unquote, approach to immigration that would impose an ideological test on newcomers and undermine the very American values of tolerance and equal treatment that he said he wanted to encourage. He also called for the creation of a commission that would expose the networks in our society that support radicalization, which struck many listeners as an uncomfortable echo of McCarthyism. No, it didn't strike many listeners as that at all. I want you to hear again what Trump said, and then we're going to dig into this, because this is a major point of departure between those of us who love this country and those of us, or them, who support its disintegration and evisceration. Here's Trump in Youngstown, Ohio yesterday. Cut 14, go.
In addition to screening out all members of the sympathizers of terrorist groups, we must also screen out any who have hostile attitudes toward our country or its principles, or who believe that Sharia law should supplant American law. Those who do not believe in our Constitution or who support bigotry and hatred will not be admitted for immigration into our country. Only those who we expect to flourish in our country and to embrace a tolerant American society should be issued visas. To put these new procedures in place, we will have to temporarily suspend immigration from some of the most dangerous and volatile regions of the world that have a history of exporting terrorism, not for us.
Now listen, ladies and gentlemen, for almost 200 years was the basic standard in determining who comes and who doesn't come into this country. That is Americanization, assimilation. That is support for the American culture and the American way of life. This was the position of our government prior to 1965. It's the position of our founding fathers and their recent progeny. Cut 15, go.
The support networks for radical Islam in this country will be stripped out and removed one by one, viciously if necessary. Viciously if necessary. Immigration officers will also have their powers restored. Those been taken away. Those who are guests in our country that are preaching hate will be asked to return home immediately, and if they don't do it, we will return them home.
This is, I don't know if people realize this, absolutely brilliant, which is why I'm attacking it, or attacking the New York Times and addressing it second day in a row, because I want to address this even more fundamentally. There was a brilliant Harvard professor by the name of Samuel P. Huntington, and he wrote a brilliant book, Who Are We? The Challenges to America's National Identity. And the book came out, as I recall, around 2000, 2004, give or take. I'm looking at 2004. He passed shortly thereafter. He was a brilliant man, and he had a way with words. And he said this: no society is immortal. As Rousseau said, quote, if Sparta and Rome perished, what state can hope to endure forever? Even the most successful societies are at some point threatened by internal disintegration and decay, and by more vigorous and ruthless external barbarian forces, he writes. In the end, the United States of America will suffer the fate of Sparta and Rome and other human communities. His point is, no society exists in perpetuity, particularly little d democracies or republics. He wrote, historically, the substance of American identity has involved four key components: race, ethnicity, culture, most notably language and religion, and ideology. The racial and ethnic Americas are no more. Cultural America is under siege, and as the Soviet experience illustrates, ideology is a weak glue to hold together people, otherwise lacking racial, ethnic, and cultural sources of community. Reasons could exist, as Robert Kaplan observed, why America, more than any other nation, may have been born to die. You know, at the end of Ameritopia, I say, we've never really figured out this puzzle, mankind. Freedom gives the freedom of the enemy to destroy freedom. Freedom gives the freedom to the enemy to destroy freedom. He goes on, yet some societies, confronted with serious challenges to their existence, are also able to postpone their demise and halt disintegration by renewing their sense of identity and purpose and the cultural values they have in common. That is what Donald Trump is talking about. Our cultural identity. That is what he's talking about, and he's absolutely correct. People want to come into this country, leave the hellhole from which they come, escaping here as quote-unquote refugees or what have you. Then they either embrace our culture and our language, they're either assimilated, which used to mean Americanized, or they can't come in. Or they cannot come in. That's been American history prior to 1965. He goes on. America has been in part an immigration nation, but much more importantly, it's been a nation that assimilated immigrants and their descendants into its society and culture. You see, it's not enough to say we're a nation of immigrants. We're a nation of assimilated immigrants into our culture. Assimilated immigrants. As Milton Gordon showed in his incisive study, writes Huntington, immigrants became assimilated to the extent they adopted the cultural patterns of the host society, acculturation, entered into the network of groups and institutions or social structures of the host society, intermarried with members of the host society, which he labels amalgamation, and developed an exclusive sense of peoplehood with the host society. In addition, assimilation required 3 steps in American acceptance of immigrants: movement toward the absence of discrimination, absence of prejudice, and absence of value-power conflicts, which is exactly Trump's point. If you're not a tolerant person, you're going to be asked to leave. If you're somebody who puts Sharia above the Constitution, you're not coming in. You don't believe in Americanization. Yet overall, historically, assimilation, particularly cultural assimilation, he writes, has been a great, possibly the greatest American success story. It enabled America to expand its population, occupy a continent, and develop its economy with millions of dedicated, energetic, ambitious, and talented people who became overwhelmingly committed to America's Anglo-Protestant culture and the values of the American creed, and who helped to make America a major force in global affairs. At the heart of this achievement, unmatched by any other society in history, was an implicit contract: assimilation. American-style assimilation. Immigrants would be accepted into American society if they embraced English as their national language, took pride in their American identity, believed in the principles of the American creed, and lived by the Protestant ethic to be reliant, hardworking, and morally upright. I don't care what your religious background is or your ethnic or racial background. The Protestant ethic, to be self-reliant, hardworking, and morally upright. Yes, he's quite right, don't you think? Historically, America has been a nation of immigration and assimilation. And assimilation has meant Americanization. Assimilation of current immigrants, unfortunately, is slower, less complete, different from the assimilation of earlier immigrants. Assimilation no longer necessarily means Americanization. And it's particularly problematic, he says, for the post-1965 immigrants, because we have an elite in this country, academia, editorial page of the New York Times, media, and so forth, which doesn't think America is so great. And so they don't support assimilation. And so when people come here, they're not encouraged to assimilate. America is trashed right before their eyes. America is trashed right before their eyes by our so-called leaders, by the president, by leaders of Congress, who kowtow to the cultural norms of those who are escaping countries to come to our country. To the extent, he writes, that America has become multicultural. Immigrants may choose among the subcultures they encounter or choose to maintain their original culture. They may assimilate into American society without assimilating the core American culture. Assimilation and Americanization are no longer identical. They're no longer identical. The consequences of immigration without assimilation for American social cohesion and cultural integrity, which were central to earlier eras, were now largely ignored. He says it often was implicitly assumed that assimilation would occur more or less automatically. Immigrants will become Americans simply because they are in America. So no need exists for major efforts explicitly to promote Americanization. That's not the case. There's been this belief that Americanization is undesirable now. It's a relatively new phenomenon in American intellectual and political history. And that's what you heard from the New York Times editorial page. A repudiation of Americanization, a repudiation of American values and traditions, the greatness that is America. This is why what Trump said about immigration, what he said about Sharia law and the Constitution, what he said about extreme vetting, what he said about removing people who are intolerant and dangerous, what he said about not bringing people into this country who come from dangerous and volatile areas of the world is completely, thoroughly, unequivocally in the American tradition pre-1965, which is why he's coming under a withering attack from the left that hates this country, cheers what takes place in Ferguson and Baltimore, cheers when capitalism is under attack, cheers open borders, cheers all these things, because they're about a meritopia. They're about a phony paradise. First anarchy through mobocracy, and then tyranny through the iron fist.
Mark Levin.